They want to feel safe. They want to be safe. And so that's why you will see candidates who support public safety and the rule of law and the Constitution. You'll likely see them rise to the top in favorability among voters.
Welcome to Deep Dive. As voters go to the polls this November, what issues will side the most with Americans? One organization is working with candidates who are working to back not only the U.S. Constitution, but those who respect law enforcement and value delivering justice to victims. For more, we turn to Justin Keener with Americans for Public Safety. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Justin.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So American for Public Safety is an interesting concept as voters prepare to cast their ballots right around the corner. So tell us how this organization got lifted off the ground.
Well, it's a lot more basic than you would think. When you started looking around the country and we're seeing violent crime becoming more and more prevalent, especially as it relates to some judges and prosecutors just releasing violent criminals onto the streets, we said enough is enough. It's time to start supporting law enforcement, delivering justice for victims. And that's why we launched. And the timing, it turned out to be pretty helpful, especially as our president decided to make this issue a top priority for the country. And we're glad to see it.
Absolutely. And some timely news, your organization just endorsed Winsome Earle-Sears, Virginia's lieutenant governor, who is vying to be the state's next governor. So walk us through that endorsement and what stood out to you about her.
Well, one, she's a clear advocate for public safety and for law enforcement. We know she will be there to have the back of the police who just want to deliver safe communities for their citizens. One troubling aspect that popped up that really just made this clear reason is the fact that her opponent would not ask Jay Jones to drop out of the race after fantasizing about the death of his political opponent and children. And that's just unacceptable. If the ticket's being led by someone who's willing to have an attorney general who will not deliver justice fairly, impartially, and will cause questions to be asked about, does this person actually care about my safety? That just raised the stakes even higher. And we're proud to support Sears and look forward to her victory.
And does your organization help up-and-coming politicians or even well-known ones, like we were just discussing, financially, or how do you exactly support these candidates?
It will vary. We plan to support them financially, plan to support them in raising awareness and talking about their campaign and the issues around it. Plan to also support in other ways, whether that's through social media, digital means, or speaking opportunities. So wherever we're needed, we'll see if we can be engaged and helpful.
And how do you think support for law enforcement goes hand in hand with supporting the U.S. Constitution?
Well, the first role and most important role of government is protecting everyone's liberty, correct? And so part of your liberty is your safety, and that's delivered through our law enforcement system, our courts and prisons, of course. And so without a functioning law enforcement system that is there to protect your liberty, that's what the Constitution provides, is that that the government will be there to protect your liberty. And so you need a functioning law enforcement, and that means they're properly funded, they're supported, and they're given what the tools they need to provide for safe communities.
Yeah, makes sense. And now in 2020, we saw this defund the police movement, which many argue backfired on public safety. It also took a toll on police morale, making it harder for many of them to do their daily jobs. And now we're seeing a resurgence of that, but even worse. Violence against ICE agents is skyrocketing, and there's even a Chicago-based Facebook page detailing ways of hurting officers and their vehicles. So we know President Trump has said there will be severe consequences for those who commit these acts. Is your organization looking to step in and reveal how this is hurting more than just the officers themselves?
Well, decreased morale affects not just law enforcement, but you see it even in sports teams. A team with high morale performs better. I think, one thing that we've seen data-wise in 2025 is that without passing any major legislation, crime actually started to improve a little bit in 2025. And we think that part of that is a direct result of President Trump making addressing violent crime a priority and letting police know he has their backs. And that probably also affects would-be assailants who know they're more likely to be held accountable. But overall, you can really look at it as police are there's this trend of disrespect towards police. and not just from people like the leading candidate for New York City Mayor Mandani, who led the defund the police effort, but we even have issues here in my home state of Texas where you have rogue judges that release repeat violent offenders, and then the police have to go out and capture those individuals again. The Ukrainian refugee who was murdered on the train, someone who should have been kept behind bars but had released multiple times. We have, Houston, I mentioned before, we have Rosalie Cook. She was murdered by an individual. Get this, he had been arrested 67 times for multiple violent offenses and was released on two PR bonds when he murdered Rosalie. So this disrespect towards police has real life consequences.
Yeah. And it's interesting time in politics, as it always seems to be, but the redistricting move in Texas has ignited a fire around the country. Both Republicans and Democrats want the seats in Congress. And Vice President J.D. Vance even argues that there are some states like Massachusetts where there was a 32% of the popular vote for conservatives, yet zero federal representatives. So what's your take on it? And will Americans for Public Safety have a role in this fight?
Well, we're not going to be involved in the redistricting battles because we think, not only is it not necessarily our issue, but public safety is the number one priority. We need to get public safety to be a bipartisan issue once again. It shouldn't be led by one party or another. Both should want to make sure that their citizens are safe for their kids to walk to school, for them to go to their jobs and not be fearful of their lives. So it needs to be a bipartisan issue. Now, if Republicans are going to lead on it, that's fantastic. We'll be there to support them as well, and we'll try and bring as many Democrats along as we can as well.
Sure. And we're seeing California trying to fight back with asking for additional seats on the upcoming ballot. It's also a place where we've seen tremendous violence against law enforcement. So I watched a video of people throwing slabs of concrete at officers during ICE protests, and that can obviously kill someone. So do you think in the Golden State supporting law enforcement is a liberal or conservative opinion? I know you just said that it shouldn't be, it should be bipartisan, clearly, but it doesn't always seem to be in this regard.
No, for some reason, the left has seen disrespect of law enforcement almost as a wedge issue, and their fringe uses it. I don't believe that many Democrats who are in the middle share those beliefs. I think it's the radical left that's driving those opinions, and I think Democrats nationally will pay a price at the polls for not supporting public safety measures, especially when you see disrespect towards police, which they know bleeds into their communities. Nobody likes to see rioting. Nobody likes to see buildings in flames. They want to feel safe. They want to be safe. And so that's why you will see candidates who support public safety and the rule of law and the Constitution. You'll likely see them rise to the top in favorability among voters.
And we also saw American flags being burned in California during those protests. Now, while the flag was already protected under the First Amendment, President Trump has really pushed for, stricter enforcement and possibly prosecution. Why do you think people do this during extreme times of protest and rioting?
Well, I think typically actions like that are taken by a fringe element on the left who don't represent the vast majority of Americans. I think President Trump is right to talk about the need to have pride for the flag and for law enforcement. And I think that's where most of Americans land.
And are there any races in particular your organization is watching?
At this time, so we just launched this year, and now we're starting to look at different states and where we may be active. I think you're going to see us engaging in states where there's a clear need for a voice for public safety to be involved and to not only lift up those champions who are doing the hard work, but also calling out the bad actors who need to be lifted up in front of voters as someone who will not respect their public safety.
And now we have people in Congress, particularly who are referred to as the squad, who are extremely, progressive. Many of them are openly critical of law enforcement. Would you say some of them have anti-American ideals in their proposed legislature?
Well, anyone who doesn't believe in respecting people's individual personal liberty is clearly that's not an American element, or at least one that represents our current Constitution. So it's a shame that there are people out there who don't believe that we should be protected, who are just fine with violent criminals being released, whether it's stealing your property, harming you personally, individually. That's not very American at all.
And we all know freedom isn't really free. I mean, we can look back on all those in the military and law enforcement who never went home to their families because they paid the ultimate sacrifice. And that sacrifice is in instilling the law and standing up for what's right. So why do you think there's so much resistance against law enforcement if they're merely trying to uphold what is good and just?
Let's talk a little bit about the sacrifice that's made. When I talk to law enforcement, I hear so often they just want to do their jobs, and that means sacrifice when sacrifice is needed. All they ask is to be supported, and I would argue they've also earned our respect at the same time. Now, why people choose to go against that, I don't really know. I think they find it a political wedge, a political toy that they can use for fringe elements within their party. I think that we also see these political games that are being played in our court systems where repeat violent offenders are being released. We see, public safety is not just something that's required by our Constitution. It's a moral obligation, and we're seeing too many political games being played with it. We don't know the exact reason, but it's time for it to stop. And I think the more we lift up the great stories done by law enforcement, the sacrifices they make, the more we'll see trust in law enforcement continue to increase.
And as many of us prepare to vote, what are some things that we can look to support that in turn support what our founding fathers intended for our great country?
I would look to candidates who address a need for public safety on all fronts, whether it's police on the ground locking up, getting the bad guys in, whether it's courts delivering true justice for victims, but also to make sure offenders get the sentence if they're convicted, they deserve, and also our prison system to make sure when those individuals are released, because about 95% of all individuals will eventually be released from prison, make sure that they're going to be safer than when they went in. That's one area where actually Donald Trump did a great job during his first term. He led on the First Step Act, and we've seen results showing that individuals released from prison who went through his program were less likely to reoffend than others. So you want to make sure you have candidates who are looking at supporting the police, a good justice system in the courts, and that our prisons are doing the jobs they're supposed to be doing so people aren't more likely to reoffend when they're released.
Justin Keener with Americans for Public Safety, thank you so much for your insight and support for patriotic candidates.
Thank you, Natasha. Pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you so much for watching Deep Dive. Please visit our website for more of these investigations and feel free to send us your questions or story ideas. We hope to see you back here next week.